You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Wow, we're here live in the studio. We're live. We're doing this live, guys. We're doing this live. And I don't know about you, but this year's been an interesting year so far. Good old 2020. And, I know that a lot of you, it's funny, I was talking to, many of you might have heard me talk about George in the past, but George has worked with me for a long time. And George is actually shooting inside the studio right here, the video, that is. And he was saying, a lot of people were saying 2020 is going to be my best year ever. It's going to be the best year back in 2019. Remember that? And I think that's interesting because, a lot of us thought that, I think. And now it just seems like it's the year of record-breaking something or other. And I know that many of you now have recently looked at the news, and you know that we have the sand cloud that's kind of cruising over the United States right now. We got that Sahara Desert sand cloud, and they said it's the biggest sand cloud that we've seen in 50 years. I mean, we're breaking records this year. And, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but, the thing is that we're getting accustomed to one thing, and I think that one thing that we're all getting accustomed to is change. Change, and more change. Holy hand grenades, Superman. Sit back. We got change. We got some change. And, that's the one thing that we've realized, right? Constant. Our life has changed. Our work has changed. The family dynamic has changed. Some people's health has changed. Hopefully good and stable. And the normal day-by-day occurrences have changed. It's interesting, you can't just go out and grab a beer at a bar right now, there's all kinds of things. Having a birthday party is pretty, it's pretty frowned upon. And it's interesting what we're dealing with. And so, in today's show, we're going to be talking about that relationship with yourself. Because I found that if we don't have a solid relationship with ourselves, well, gosh, it's something that we have to develop to get some sort of stability in our life. I know that many of you have been maybe even quarantined on your own by yourself, and that was a real awakening. I mean, maybe you had your dog, your cat, or your fish, or your whatever, but at the same point in time, you had to deal with getting to know yourself or avoiding getting to know yourself. And maybe you got to know some stuff about yourself that, was very interesting, and some stuff that maybe scared you. And that's okay, because when we're cultivating this relationship with ourselves, we're getting ready for it. We're creating it. And we have to figure out, how do we cultivate that relationship? Later on in the hour, Dan Nelson is joining me live here in the studio. Dan is our resident genealogist. He's our resident historian. We're going to talk a little bit about history. History, as we know, repeats itself, even though we're being told all the time that this is the first groundbreaking whatever this is happening. And yeah, I think the murder hornets are the one thing that is happening that hasn't really happened before. I think I can go with that. But there's a lot of things that have happened in the past that we just need to be aware of. And a lot of times with history, when we get to learn about history and we know the truth about history, we're not played by certain media types when we're told how something went down. And a lot of times, some of the things that we're told that went down necessarily didn't go down that way. So we'll be talking about history. We got a special show, for July 4th weekend as well. And we're going to be talking about some interesting stuff about how, the taking down of these monuments and what's going on right now. Well, it happened before as well. So we're going to talk about that. It's not the first time. I'm sure it's not the last time. But we're going to be talking about that and historical reference. So stay tuned. Dan will be joining us here later on here in the hour in the third segment. So, we're talking about cultivating a relationship with ourselves and realizing, getting to know thyself, right? Thyself. Who am I? What am I about? What is my motivation? What is important to me? And I think the biggest problem we have is the societal, kind of pushback on what we feel is right for us, right? And so, we have society telling us, well, everybody should have a bunch of kids, and you should be married forever, and you should have these cars, and you should work this type of job, and then eventually at a certain age you should retire, and then you're supposed to go out and do X, Y, Z. And you know what? Quite honestly, why? Why am I buying into this bill of goods that I've been sold? And I think we have to look at the difference. And I know that some of you out there listening to the show right now live on USA Radio Networks is like, you know what, Ashley, I'm not buying into any of that societal, crud. I'm not doing it. I'm living my own life just for me. But are you really? Because I would have to say that most of us are not. I would have to say that most of us are questioning our validity based on something, that we're not good enough because we didn't do this. Or we don't have a well-rounded life because we don't have this. Or we're missing that. Or we're missing this. And it's interesting, too, how life has this kind of yin-yang, give and take, push and pull situation where it does seem like you can't have everything. You can have this, but you can't have children. You can have a career, but you can't have children. You can have this, but you can't have that. And it's interesting, and it poses the question, about how, obviously a rose has its own thorns, right? I mean, except for the roses that they make, that they hybrid, it doesn't have thorns, but we'll leave that out of the equation for right now, right? So, for what we're talking about, right, a rose, even though it's beautiful, has thorns that will hurt you, right? A thorn bush, right? And so, a briar, right? So it's like, it seems like life is kind of like that, but we got to figure out what are we buying into and what are we not. What defines me and what does not apply to me? And then the biggest thing, though, is that we can understand that, but how are we not judging ourselves or making ourselves feel bad, unconsciously judging ourselves for not doing one thing or another? I hear when I'm talking to some of my friends who have children, and they stayed at home to take care of these children, which is great. But you can hear in the, kind of when they're talking about certain things, they really wish that they would have had a career, right? And they kind of struggle with that. And, you see on TV the career woman, right? And you see that. And then you have, like, the career women that I know that struggle with the fact that they didn't have children. You have the men that sit there and say, I provided for my kids, but, I didn't get to see them that much. And it's like, what do I do? And all of a sudden my kids are growing up now, and I'm realizing, where did all the time go? I was able to buy them stuff and provide them necessities and things, but at the same time, our relationship is struggling. And you see how interesting this whole society is, because we look on TV and everything's based about money. How much money you made last year, how much money you have, how many resources do you have, how many products and services do you have. You look at this stuff, and it's so hard for people as they're growing up and going through the system to try to be able to find themselves in all this noise. But the biggest thing is to try to find personal value in this noise. How do I find my personal value? How do I connect with my personal value and cherish that personal value and not feel like I need to be somebody else? And it's hard. I've fallen prey into this. I know that you probably have too. The kind of car you drive, the house you have, right? The money you make. All of these things get in the way of our value system or how we see ourselves. Children, marriage, family, money. And I find that, many of us, what we call the midlife crisis, is really a wake-up call. The midlife crisis is really a wake-up call, I think, because it's like, and you can have a midlife crisis. It doesn't have to be middle of your life, okay? I had a midlife crisis when I was really young. I think I've had multiple midlife crises, and I'm not in the middle of my life. And I think you can have it at any time, but I think what it is like, oh my God, what am I doing? I've got to do this, or I want to do that, or I got to figure this out. I got to figure this out. I got to figure out where I want to be at and who I want to be. And I want to figure out, what I want to do, not what I'm told that I should be doing. I want to give back in my own way. And I want to be able to feel valuable about giving back in my own way. And I want to be able to be okay with that and be more than just okay with that. I find that people post on Facebook a lot of stuff, and some of the stuff is really great. And I try to do everything I can, to give feedback. I just can't be on it that much, but I try to give feedback to folks, especially when they're doing something great. But it's got to hurt sometimes because it's like, they're putting something out there and they only get a few likes or a few comments. And they're putting their heart and soul out there. And I find that a lot of times we're looking for that feedback from people. We're looking for them to say, good job, I'm so proud of you. And you don't get that. And maybe you do get it, but it's not directly always related to like your passion and your purpose. And I find that the societal regulations, the media, the press, that stuff really weighs us down. And it's like the way you're supposed to look and how you're supposed to dress, right? It's just like everything about our society is like this homogenized branding. And it's insulting. And I'm insulted by it. And I've had enough of it. And I'm tired of women trying to be 92 pounds. And I'm tired of men trying to be these muscle maniacs because that's all they know. Because that's what they're being sold, the bill of goods. And, I'm tired of people not taking responsibility for their life because they're scared to, because they feel like people are going to judge them adversely. The fact that we can't speak honestly a lot of times because somebody might come back and get angry. The fact that a lot of people feel like they're the silent majority because they can't speak up because they're scared. I just think that there's a lot of things going on right now that we have to sit there and get connected with our own true reality. And how do we do that with all this noise? How does one person center themselves? I know that many of you have gotten into one thing in your life, whether it's giving back to society and maybe you have this passion project and it's not making any money and people sit there and say, when is that passion project going to make money? And you're like, well, I'm working at it. And they're like, and you got your CPA in the background saying, well, until you make X, Y, Z, this is just a hobby. It's just a hobby. You need to really start focusing on what you're doing with your life. It's painful. And it's like we make a big deal about the only time that you're successful is when you're making a certain amount of money. And that's just not true. And it's toxic. It's toxic. There's a lot of good people out there that don't make a lot of money. And they work really hard for what they do, man. And that's what really gets to me is that the society is based on the slippery slope of fabrication to create adversity and inequality. And I'm not talking about socialism. I'm saying we need to get to the point where we can stop looking at this advertising and stop buying into this manipulation and start looking at our own self and cherish ourselves and try to find the community of other people who cherish themselves as well and can see your value. You know what? We got to do it. We got to make some changes, okay? It's been a year, right? Change is certain. But why don't we start making some positive changes and start turning off the stuff that doesn't work for us anymore? Stay tuned when I return. We'll be talking more about this and how you can stand your ground and find your purpose. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I'm talking about the wake-up call. Living for yourself instead of living for everybody else. Living for yourself instead of living hyped up by media. I mean, we see folks, it's like we're supposed to have this car, we're supposed to drive this thing, we're supposed to live in this type of house, we're supposed to have this kind of job, we're supposed to have this, that, this, and those. And all that other stuff is not acceptable. It's interesting when I meet folks who have been divorced multiple times and they go, oh, I'm just so embarrassed. I'm like, embarrassed for what? Why are you embarrassed? Well, you just 2 divorces. 2 divorces are so bad. I'm like, who told you that 2 divorces are so bad? When I meet people that have never been married before, well, I've never been married. And they say it just kind of like their head down, and they're just kind of beat down, and you're like, why are you so depressed about never being married? Well, it's just not normal. Something wrong with me. Something wrong with you for real? I mean, I know some people that are happy that aren't married. They're real happy. They don't have to do anything for other people, and they're happy about their life, and they got their own thing going, and it's like, really? Something wrong with you? I know people that don't have any children, and they're like, oh, man, everybody's got kids, and I don't have any kids, and, it's just like all these things that we're buying into. Or I got to make XYZ amount of money, or I'm considered, not successful. Who said? Why do I have to wear these shoes because that makes me be cool? Why do I have to have this watch because that means that I'm like successful? It's just to me. It's just you see through these building blocks of media, and you see through these societal blocks, and they create all these things. Like you see these magazines where they sell this stuff where you can put 25 watches in this thing, and they'll self-regulate themselves. If you got like 25 Rolexes, in case you got 25 Rolexes sitting around, it's interesting. It's like, and it seems like the Great Divide continues. If you really look at it, the divide keeps perpetuating. And it's like you see the headlines where so-and-so makes $50 billion on this payout of XYZ. And then you go home and you go, golly, can't believe this. So it's like, how do we take and stop taking in that stuff and judging ourselves? You know what I'm saying? It's almost like when you're dealing with somebody that's gaslighting you and manipulating you and making you feel bad, right? And you keep taking their calls or texts, and they keep making you feel worse and worse. And then you finally have enough, and you go, I'm going to block them. And then you feel bad about blocking them. But you block them because you haven't gotten the tools to be able to deal with it yet. And so you block them. Well, you hope that you're working to get the tools, right? The mental, emotional tools that you need to deal with it. But then you have to ask yourself again, because I have folks that say, well, everybody tells you that your family is so important. You're supposed to hang out with your family. And I said, well, I get it, but, some folks, they don't have, their family has been extremely toxic to them, extremely painful. Do you need to be hanging out with these people that put you down all the time, make you question your reality? Is that where you need to be at? Because society tells you that you should hang out with your mom or dad? There's a thing called self-preservation, right? And we got to think about that too. I just think that a lot of us are putting a bunch of stuff on us that we don't need to put on us based on what other people are telling us what we should be doing. So how do you get out of the muck and yuck of what other people are telling you, and how do you put it all in perspective? I thought it was funny. I had a friend of mine years ago would send me pictures of these houses out in kind of the suburbs. You should live in one of these houses. You should move out to the suburbs. And I'm like, I don't want to move out to the suburbs. And so I would send it back and say, hey, I think this house is a great house for you. And eventually he was like, you know what? You're right. I might move out to the suburbs. I don't need to do that. It's up to you. But we have to push that back on them. It's not me. You're not trying to sell me my version of me. I got me. I don't need to buy the version that you're trying to sell of me, because it's BS. Stay tuned. We'll be back. We got a lot going on here on this show. You know that. So you got to get back here. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. We'll be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shades.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about you, the original you, away from the social media and the societal implications and what you're supposed to be and who you're supposed to be and who you're not supposed to be. Interesting stuff here, guys. And that's the thing, is that we're being told and sold a bill of goods that we're not necessarily aware of, and we actually take in that bill of goods as our own thoughts. Like, we don't realize that some of this stuff isn't our own thought. This has been integrated into our lives from the very beginning. It's all been a coup on the individual, and we don't realize how much of that we've ingested and take it as face value, and we regurgitate it all the time, and we tell other people what they should be doing. It's like I started realizing the other day I was looking at something on Facebook, and some people were telling me, they're like, I feel like I need to speak up, and I need to tell them what's right, and I need to tell them what's wrong, and tell them what they're doing wrong, and point out their issue and show the truth. And I said, you know what? I don't even know what the truth is anymore. I mean, think about it. I mean, what do we do? I mean, and why is it that you feel like you have to expose the truth for these people? What does that say? I mean, isn't it just good enough to know that you know what you're doing and move forward with that? I mean, why is it that we're always supposed to be right? The thing that I've realized is some of the worst relationships in our life is based on the fact that we want to be right. Who cares? In the end, you're not going to sit there and be like, you're at the funeral. I was right. I was right. Oh, ha, ha. Take it. It's like, suck it. You're not going to sit there and do that. You're going to sit there and feel really bad about being the one that was always right. Did it matter? Did it not matter? I mean, regret is something we're going to be talking about a little bit coming up in our July 4th show. Dan's going to be on the show as well. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that and how to take your life, and instead of looking at your life right now, okay? Instead of looking at your life right now and saying, okay, this is what I should be doing, I want you to look at your life from the back end of it. Let's look at 110 years old, and I want you to look backwards. And then I want you to ask yourself, are you too old to do that? It was interesting. I was talking to some folks the other day, and they were like, well, I'm too old to go back to school. And I was like, well, I got a neighbor that's a judge that went to law school when she was in her late 40s and became a judge when she was 60. So I don't really think that there's like this late thing. I know people that got married in their 80s. Come on. Let's get our heads out of our butt. Let's start living our life based on what we want to do instead of what people are telling us that we have to do. Okay? And that's what we need to do. And so I want you to start taking inventory. Who am I? And I recently did some videos. It's up on YouTube. The latest video was just launched a couple of days ago. And the video is about getting that relationship with you. The most important relationship. It's the latest video on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, put in Ashley, Berges, Berges, and you'll find it. Boom! Click on it. You'll see me and me. You'll see a picture of me and me looking at myself on a couch. So there's like two of me, but there's only one of me, and I don't have a twin. So, but I want you to check that video out because it talks about learning about yourself and connecting with yourself. And there's a whole series coming out. The one that I did before that was the red flags that indicate that you are not living your life for you. Okay, so we're going to be talking more about that. And the show next week is going to continue this into that whole regret module, because once we start regretting things, that's a slippery slope. Because the thing is that regret really stinks. And why should we regret something that we wanted to do? And the thing is that a lot of times we regret not doing something because society says that we shouldn't, right? It says that we shouldn't, or that we're too old, or it's not the right thing, or we're not doing it for the right reasons, or whatever. So now we got to get out of that and really move forward. Okay, right now let's talk about history. I think it's interesting how history does repeat itself, right? And it's interesting how a lot of times things happen all the time. And so we have a resident historian and genealogist for a reason, because history is actually important. Dan, you've been studying this stuff so much. You got all this amazing history. Isn't it funny how things do actually repeat itself, but a lot of times the way that it's portrayed in the news is like, this is the first time it's ever happened.
Yeah, most of the new news is actually old news. We just don't know it because we don't spend a lot of time looking in old newspapers and reading old documents. So we think, wow, this is the first time it's ever been stressful on Earth. Only in my lifetime is it stressful or difficult. So you do learn a lot from history in that regard.
I think it's interesting, too. It's like, we're going to be talking about this in the next show here in July, our July 4th show, right, about the monuments being taken down and how this isn't the first time as well.
Right. Absolutely. We will cover that. We will talk about the history of 4th of July and monuments being pulled down before.
That's interesting. So today, so what do you have for us today? I know that we have a moral of the story today, so this is good. So, it's funny because Dan was telling me, a lot of times in history, it doesn't make history unless there's something crazy happens.
Right.
But what do we have today?
Well, why I like this story is, you sort of have a choice, and a lot of what Ashley's talking about is to not sort of get burdened by the past. We get burdened by our ancestors. Could be just as, one generation back with our own parents. But what I look for is to give people the opportunity to be inspired by their ancestors. What did some of that shared DNA before you do that made the world a better place, or how did they make their life a little less unpleasant and more pleasant? So we're going to be talking about a guy today named Benjamin Smith, and he was the fifth great-grandfather of one of my clients. And this client, he told me, he said, you won't find anything interesting with my ancestors. They were all boring. They were just Midwestern farmers, didn't make the news, didn't do anything exciting. Well, this guy, Benjamin Smith, was not so boring. He enlisted as a private during the American Revolution, got assigned to General Israel Putnam's group, and headed out to the Battle of Long Island. Well, he was wounded in the left leg by a ball shot from a cannon, so not good there, and caused him to be crippled. So the ball remained in his leg actually till death. So everything I'm going to tell you from this point on, keep in mind, this is a wounded person with a ball in their leg. And so Benjamin, when he got hurt, got captured by the British. So the typical thing the British did is they sent you to New York Harbor, and you were put on this terrible ship, we'll talk more about it, called the Jersey. Well, because of bad weather, they couldn't get him over there, so instead they went the other way to the British possession up in Nova Scotia. So he was taken up there to Halifax. Well, he escaped, something he turned out to be particularly good at. And so he worked his way down the shore as he escaped from where they had them there in Halifax, and he came upon a ship that had pulled into shore, and it was an American privateer. So he asked if he could join on, and he joined on. And they went out and started plundering British goods and ashore and in ships. And so here you've got now, he's basically a legitimate, because when you're with a privateer, you're now authorized by government. You're not just a regular pirate. So he's a legal pirate who's crippled out doing this stuff. So he joins up with this guy named Captain Pratt, and they head to the Turks down in the Caribbean and to Port-au-Prince and then to Salem, and they're raiding these British ships, doing all kinds of bad stuff as far as the British are concerned. And then they're off the coast of Ireland, and they get captured by a British sloop of war. So they take Benjamin and his buddies, and they take him to New York City. So he gets put on this prison ship called the Jersey, and basically that was sort of a death sentence. It was full of disease. They didn't feed them well. And if you're going to be in a hospital, you at least want it to not be moving. And you're on a ship. So, yeah, if you have any issues with seasickness. So he gets on this ship, and they manage to escape. And so they get ashore. And how they actually escaped is an interesting story in itself. They pulled off the edges of a porthole, and they swam to shore. No easy feat in New York Harbor. But anyways, they get to the relative's house, and he's concerned about the fact that they may know who he is. And in fact, they do, and they turn him into the British. So now he's been captured for the third time. So the British say, okay, something needs to happen to this guy. He doesn't learn his lesson. So 449 lashes on his back. That would kill most of us. Most of us couldn't handle more than one lash. But anyways, he's taken to the hospital. He organizes an escape from the hospital by boat. So his third escape. Yeah, this guy, you gotta hold him down. So he gets back and he starts plundering again and hangs out and does his thing on different ships in different parts of the world. And then when they're down in the West Indies doing their thing, they pass the French fleet that's coming back from Yorktown, where Cornwallis surrendered. And he's like, cool, I can go home again. The British lost. And so he gets a ride back home. And so sort of the moral of the story, if you will, is this guy was pretty much plain, ordinary person. He could have spent his entire imprisonment if he hadn't tried to escape, if he hadn't tried to change his circumstances. And so he ends up being a hero and a patriot, contributing to the cause. And then eventually, as he gets older, he goes to Luzerne, Pennsylvania. He's a farmer, and he ends up retiring from the military, obviously. He's a farmer. He waited 40 years to record all this information. And when I found it, it was only in two places, in the Historical Society in Exeter, Pennsylvania, and a book that Google had digitized. So it was a rare story to find. So I tell people, if the ancestors can find stuff on a guy named Smith, we can find stuff on anybody. So that's the story of Benjamin Smith.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, you're right, on Smith. That's interesting. I mean, think about how this guy literally escaped. I mean, and then he went to his relative's house and got thrown back in?
Well, one of the things that happened during the Revolution is you had people in the same families, no different than some of the arguments we have today at Thanksgiving, where people were pro-British, called Tories, and then people that were against the British that were in support of the Revolution. So sometimes you didn't know which way your relatives were going to lean, and if they were Tories, they would turn you in if you showed up. They, I don't know if they got rewards or they just got the satisfaction of knowing you were removed from the opposition. So you couldn't necessarily even trust your own family to not,
wow.
do you harm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That gives a whole new meaning to family, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you're able to find all this information, and he didn't document this for 40 years, so it was 40 years later that he finally documented this information?
Yeah, I guess when he realized that as he got to old age that maybe he needed to, record this for his descendants so they'd know of his contribution. It's no different than people today that, had grandfathers that fought in World War II or Korea, and they don't talk much about it because they went, they did their thing, but they're not braggarts. There's parts of the story they'd probably like to forget. Well, I don't think it was any different back then. Mm-hmm. Most people weren't like, oh, yeah, I fought in the Revolution, and I killed all these people, and I did all this great stuff. It's sort of like, hey, I'm just going to go farm and, not brag about it. But he wanted to record it, and it's a great story. I mean, I have a cousin that's a Hollywood screenwriter. I sent him the story. I said, when the Patriot movies come back into vogue, you need to read this one. Of course, he's got, stacks of scripts. So.
I like that, though. That'd be cool. I wonder who would play him. That's interesting. Yeah, and I think that a lot of y'all listening right now, it's like overcoming the odds. It's like a lot of times we have to overcome things that seem insurmountable. I mean, it seems overwhelming. I mean, think about just this concept alone and how many times you've escaped a bad situation or a toxic situation, or you escaped going down a reality that wasn't you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he wasn't a sailor, and yet he became a privateer, a pirate, and thrived and did well at it. It's certainly been easier to say, I'll just wait out my time here, hope it works okay, maybe I'll get paroled, hopefully the Americans win, maybe the British will win, and this way, I won't be in harm's way if I just stay here in this prison camp. So he definitely had to make some assertive choices, and he was only 22 years old. This wasn't like he had a life of experience behind him to make these choices.
That's pretty amazing too. It's like, and I think a lot of times too, that's one of the things I was talking about earlier. I think that age is another joke. I think age is another confine that society creates about old and young. And one of the things I want y'all to step back and think about right now on this show is, how often do you think that you are too young? How often do you think that you're too old? And how often are you putting way too much emphasis on your age? And Dan, I don't know about you, but I see people constantly. They're either so freaked out about age that they lie constantly about their age. And then I know some people that are so, like, they're older than they are. They're the ones that make themselves 10 years older. And it's interesting how when you look at somebody that makes themselves older, how they actually look older.
Yes, I agree. They walk differently. They carry themselves. They shy away from activities that are a little more threatening. And of course, it's sort of interesting because outside of politics, we sort of have this deference towards younger age in our society. And I'm not trying to get into politics, but we have two probable candidates here for president that are going to be in the late half of their 70s. So if you can, become the president at that age, I'm sure there's a whole lot of other stuff you could be doing, in your late 70s that people choose not to. They say, oh, that's too risky behavior. I shouldn't be doing that. I should be back on the couch. My time's over,
Yeah, it's interesting, the concept of when people say, like, you're over the hill or you're too old. Right. Like, you're right. It's like, or people feel like they have to retire. And it's like, well, I got the idea, but I mean, like, well, what are you going to do? I mean, at what point, what are you going to do? And that's the thing that I find, it's like, you have this lifetime. I mean, why not use it? I mean, what else are we going to do? I mean, at this moment now, if you're in the state of Texas, I don't think you can go to a bar right now. So we can't go to a bar. We can't have a drink. Yeah. So why don't we think about it? I mean, if you're on the fence about changing careers, if you're on the fence about, starting a new life, if you're on the fence about, met somebody that you're really in love with, but you're in your 70s, 80s, whatever, this is the time to start making these choices that are based on you, not based on what society says.
Yep. No point in wasting a perfectly good crisis when it's right in front of you.
I love that. Okay, guys, perfectly good crisis. You heard it. When we return, we're going to be talking more about how you can prioritize this, how you can do it. Just a couple of tips and tricks on how to do that. Just think about it. It's all these things that we have to think about. And the greatest thing about it is if you can think about it, you don't have to act on it right now. You can just think about it. connecting the dots and start writing down some stuff that you want to create, you want to do, and realizing you have the time to do it. If you're here right now, well, you're here right now. So stay tuned. Don't leave. We've got a little bit more left. Live Your True Life Perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. Will be back in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about personal identity, understanding who you are, what matters, and where you stand, instead of looking at societal limitations, or instead of reading and watching media and taking that and telling us who we're supposed to be, instead of listening to other people tell us who we're supposed to be, and also being able to break down the things that we learned when we were a kid that's not necessarily true either. I mean, many of us have these thoughts in our head that we believe that we have to do this or that to be successful, or we have to do this or that to be the right type of woman, or to be a man, I have to do this. And it's like, really? But where do we begin to take that inventory? How do we figure that out? Because we have to figure out inventory of who we are and what we want. And right before the break, Dan and I were talking about the concept of age. And, Dan, I think it's, with the age thing, I think it's you're only as old as you think you are. You're only as young as you think you are. And that's something that I really think everybody should think about, is that, are you living your life based on the number age you are, or are you living your life based on how you feel?
Yeah, I do think there's this, particularly when you talk about retirement, there's this artificial thing because people didn't used to retire. They just got disabled and couldn't do it anymore. So I come across people that were farming in their 70s and 80s. That was their recorded profession in the census. And then somewhere in probably the 1940s, 50s, 60s, this concept of retirement came along, and people would turn a certain age. But you have to realize most men didn't live past 63. I mean, when Social Security was established, so it wasn't a long retirement. Well, now you sort of have this artificial thing where people are supposed to retire at 65 and then, sort of finish out their life. Well, they might live to be 85 or 90 nowadays. So you really need to think about, what is it I'm going to do when this gig sort of comes to an end? I'm fortunate I'm able to slightly monetize a passion, but it keeps my brain active. That's the main thing, because I don't know how you have a job where you use your brain and then you just say, okay, now my brain's going to just chase golf balls and fish.
I agree with you. And I think also, too, why? If you want to work and you can work, you should. I mean, and I think also, too, we fall into this category. I've met many people in my life that they retired and then they died relatively quickly after that retirement. Yeah. And it was based on a societal deal, and also it was based on a corporate deal. Okay, well, you've turned X, Y, Z, and it's time for you to retire. But it was their passion. It was what they love to do. Another thing I want you to do is I want you to start being mindful in the moment. I want you to start being mindful of how you feel about you. How do you feel about your life? How happy are you in your life right now? How happy are you day in and day out? Is there something that gives you a lot of personal pleasure in a very positive way that you need to be focusing more of your energy on? Or on the opposite, are you in a situation right now that's really toxic? Are you in a situation right now that you are unhappy more than you're happy? And I think that's interesting. I think, Dan, you can understand. You can agree to that. It's like, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing if it didn't bring you happiness. Absolutely.
But certainly when I was younger, I can't say I had the same clarity. And so you have to be more intentional, about where it's going to go. Because you spend so much time when you're young chasing money, trying to take care of your family, and you don't really think about necessarily always what brings you happiness. But as you mature, you should be able to start to hone that down and be more intentional.
And I think also the other thing, too, is just being mindful in each moment of every day of what you're doing. Think about it. Connect with it. Connect with the nature. Connect with yourself. I mean, heck, your hand is a miracle. Look at your hand. Focus on being mindful. Do something to get yourself out of this thinking mind about how you're not good enough, or you're not valuable enough, or what you're giving to society isn't good enough, or you need to do more, or you're not doing enough, or you need to have this thing, or you need to have that title, or you need to have that corner office, or you need to have this. And it's like that stuff gets in the way of all the stuff we're trying to do. And I think if you just step back and also start analyzing the folks that are in your ear. Who's in your ear talking? And are they talking about stuff that's valuable to you? Or are they talking about stuff that's bringing you down? Or are they talking about stuff that doesn't apply to you? Even your own family. Okay, they were taught these things too. Wasn't them genuinely. It's like, when you were growing up and your family says, you can't ever do that. You'll never make a dime. You'll never be able to support yourself. You'll be in dire straits. But you know what? That could have been the thing that you really wanted to do. How do they know that you're not going to be successful? They say that because guess what? Their parents said that. And their parents said that to their parents. And if you keep going through the cycle, we're living a cyclical situation. So think about it. Let's stop the cycle. It's time to move on. Dan, great having you on the show today.
Glad to be here. It was great.
Awesome. He'll be back next week on our July 4th special. Don't miss it. We got July 4th coming up. And just remember, start analyzing. Is this my thought or is this People Magazine thought? Is this my thought or is this CNN or Fox? Is this my thought or is this what my mom told me? Is this my thought or is this what my dad told me? Think about it. Let's talk about this because this is the stuff that really needs to be talked about. Because we got to make these changes to have a better world and to have a better life. So stay tuned. We'll be back next week. Please tune back in. Can't wait. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.